What's up, everyone? Chris back again with episode 22 of What Could Have Been in Wrestling. Again, apologies for last week. I was traveling, so I wasn't able to get up here last weekend. But now that I'm back home, I wanted to get up here as soon as possible. So why don't we get right into today's topic? Today, I'm taking us back to 1993. And I want to talk about what if Ric Flair had stayed with the WWF in 1993 and formed his own Four Horsemen stable. So, looking back, Ric Flair had debuted in the WWF in 1991, thanks to Bobby the Brain Heenan. And he actually came out with the WCW World title because he never gave it back to the company after being fired by Jim Herd. And he was the self-proclaimed real world champion. And while he did win the WWF title twice, he had decided, after losing a career-ending match to Mr. Perfect, that it was time for him to go back to Atlanta and go back to WCW. But in this scenario, I want to look at things a little differently. So why don't we pick it up right after the 1993 Royal Rumble, where on Raw the next night, Perfect and Flair have their match. In this scenario, then, it would not be a career-ending match, but they would need to have their grudge match. Because Mr. Perfect had done a face turn very recently and had tagged with the Macho Man Randy Savage at Survivor Series 92 that year and actually beat Ric Flair and Razor Ramon in a tag match. So going right from there and picking it up, like I said, the night after the Rumble, they can have their match still, and Mr. Perfect can still win that match. I think you still want to establish Perfect now as a babyface, just getting back in the ring. He can beat Ric Flair in that match. However, right after that, I think that since it wouldn't be career-ending, they could hint at the feud continuing. And while Perfect still may want to get his hands on Flair, someone else can come out and attack Perfect from behind and jumpstart their feud for WrestleMania 9. That someone, and the first person to be inducted into this WWF Four Horsemen faction, would be the narcissist Lex Luger. Now, speaking of the 93 Rumble, the night before that Raw, Lex Luger had made his debut as a heel, again with the introduction of Bobby the Brain Heenan, and he had just joined the WWF. And leading up into WrestleMania 9 that year, where Perfect did face Lex Luger, they had had their feud where obviously Heenan wanted to take revenge on behalf of Flair, and he had basically replaced Ric Flair with Lex Luger as his henchman. So I think you can still have Lex Luger come out and knock out Mr. Perfect with that, quote, bionic forearm that had the steel plates and screws in his forearm because of the motorcycle accident. So now we have Ric Flair and one of the old Four Horsemen of the NWA, Lex Luger, as the first two members. The third member would be a man I just mentioned who, like I said, had teamed with Flair at the 92 Survivor Series. And I think he would act in that enforcer role. And that would be Razor Ramon. Razor had actually been loosely associated with Flair up to this point. He did help Rick beat the Macho Man for the WWF title in the fall of 1992 when he debuted and kicked Randy Savage's leg out of his leg. Let me know if anyone gets that reference. And so, again, with his loose association with Flair, I think he would fit in well. And he would be, like I said, in that number 2 enforcer role. The fourth member of this Four Horsemen faction would be a young upstart who had just recently won the Intercontinental title. Yes, that's right. It would be a young Shawn Michaels. Shawn Michaels, of course, was the man who retired Ric Flair in 2008 at WrestleMania 24. And also, of course, he would be, in terms of being the young prodigy, he would be what Randy Orton was to Evolution when they first got together in 2003. So now we have the Four Horsemen of Ric Flair, Razor Ramon, Lex Luger, and the Intercontinental Champion Shawn Michaels. So moving forward, like I said, you can actually have Lex Luger feuding with Mr. Perfect as we build towards WrestleMania 9, because remember, there's not as many pay-per-views at this point. And for Flair with Ramon and Shawn Michaels, I think you can actually have them wrestle as a trio representing the Horsemen rather than having them have singles matches, like I said, going into WrestleMania 9. Shawn Michaels had been in a feud with Tatanka over the Intercontinental title, and Tatanka had beaten him in a non-title match. But, one, I don't think actually you need to have that match, that Intercontinental title match at WrestleMania. One, it had kind of a flat finish because I believe it was a disqualification because the change was made last minute to not give Tatanka the title. And as a hint in terms of how the match would go, Tatanka, while having that undefeated streak that was broken that fall of 93 by Ludwig Borga when he got hit with a chair and then pinned with one finger, that undefeated streak never really amounted to much, and Tatanka never won a title. So I think actually instead of giving them a singles match, I think going into it, into WrestleMania 9, you can have three of the Four Horsemen, Flair, Shawn Michaels, and and Razor Ramon, You can have them in a six-man versus Tatanka and the debuting Steiner brothers. So now we're really bringing in a big crossover because the Steiner brothers were also guys from NWA/WCW who had feuded with the Horsemen for years. So I definitely think that would be a good crossover and a good throwback, and might draw the interest of some fans who were the old school WCW fans at that point and wanted to still see Flair on their television. So having him feud with the Steiners, I think, could have definitely been something that would have been appealing to both new school and older fans. Obviously, leading into Raws, you can have that where you can have Luger wrestling in singles matches against one of the Steiners, or you can have Razor, obviously, in that role, taking on someone like Tatanka. Same, obviously, with Shawn Michaels. And so now, the matches we have now for WrestleMania 9 would be Perfect versus Luger, versus Lex Luger, and, of course, the six-man I just mentioned as well, the Steiner brothers with Tatanka versus Razor Ramon, Ric Flair, and Shawn Michaels. With that six-man, I actually think what can happen there is I think the final two men in the ring, the two legal men, should be Shawn Michaels and Tatanka. And when Tatanka comes off the top rope for that tomahawk chop he always did, I think you can have Shawn Michaels catch him with a super kick. And Shawn Michaels now is the one who ends Tatanka's undefeated streak, not Ludwig Borga. So there's a big feather in the Horsemen's and Shawn Michaels' cap. Obviously, he's the Intercontinental Champion, but also he has upended Tatanka's undefeated record. For the singles match, Luger did face Perfect at WrestleMania 9 that year, 93. And after winning with a backslide, even though Perfect's feet were on the ropes, Lex Luger did then knock Mr. Perfect out with that bionic forearm and left him laying in the middle of the ring. I still want to have that happen. because going forward after that post-match, Perfect did attack Lex Luger backstage, and Lex Luger happened to be having a conversation with Shawn Michaels, so this fits in perfectly. No pun intended. So, after Perfect is able to get his hands on Luger, Shawn Michaels can jump in, and then he's the one who attacks Perfect with the garbage can and leaves him laying. That can transition into a feud with Shawn Michaels versus Perfect over the Intercontinental title, and we can still obviously have the Steiner brothers feuding with the rest of the Horsemen. The reason why I want to do that is because it was not long after WrestleMania the Steiner brothers started challenging Money Incorporated for the tag titles. And while it did take a few months into the late spring, early summer, the Steiner brothers were able to become the tag team champions. So I think it makes sense, definitely, that the Horsemen are still chasing belts and still going after, obviously, having the Intercontinental Champion on their side, but now going after the tag titles as well. Now, leading into King of the Ring of 1993, we did have Shawn Michaels facing Kona Crush, for the Intercontinental title. And of course, we had Lex Luger actually battling to a draw with Tatanka. And we also had Bret Hart winning the King of the Ring after beating Razor Ramon in the first round. Then Mr. Perfect and Bam Bam Bigelow. So here I want to change things up, actually. And I want to show you where it's going long term. We can still have Crush, who I think was very quietly and very underrated how over he was in the Kona Crush gimmick. I think he was honestly one of the top baby faces that they didn't run with at that time, which is a recurring trend with Vince over the years. And I think you can actually have him face Razor Ramon on an episode of Raw or Superstars. And you can have him beat Razor Ramon, and he can become the number one contender because of that to Shawn's Intercontinental title. So Razor had been sent out as the enforcer to get rid of this problem, but couldn't get the job done, which you'll see come into play a little bit later. As a side note, Crush and Razor did face in reality one time, I believe, and I remember watching it a long time ago, but I wanted to bring that up because Crush, I believe, is the only person to ever kick out of the Razor's Edge. I know it's done by Damian Priest now, but when Scott Hall did it as Razor Ramon, no one kicked out of it except for Crush that one time. So, back on topic here. Now we have Crush facing Shawn Michaels at King of the Ring, going towards King of the Ring for the Intercontinental title. And I still think actually what you can easily do there is I think you can do the title change for the Steiner brothers a little bit earlier. You can have the Steiner brothers be the tag team champions, and they can actually take on Lex Luger and Ric Flair as a tag team for those tag titles. The match can end in disqualification. You can have, obviously, the Horsemen getting disqualified to protect them so no one has to eat the pinfall. But the Steiners can still remain the tag champions because they would have just won them at that point. Razor Ramon can still participate in the King of the Ring, and again, he can come up short, losing to Bret Hart. But we still have Shawn Michaels again facing Crush, and while that can be a competitive matchup, you can have Crush getting distracted by Razor and the rest of the Horsemen, and Shawn is able to then hit a super kick from behind and then win, basically with help of the other Horsemen, and retain the Intercontinental title. So now as we get deeper into the summer, you can have the Horsemen still chasing the tag titles, and you can do combinations of Luger and Razor, obviously along with Flair and Razor, and of course the original of maybe even Luger and a Shawn Michaels going after the Steiner brothers tag team belts. And I think that would make for some very good matches. especially when you have that old WCW connection of Luger and Flair versus the Steiners. I think they would be very comfortable working with each other and making each other look as good as possible. Also at that time, here's something that would definitely change as well. Yokozuna, at that King of the Ring, and going through that summer, had won the WWF title from Hulk Hogan. And Lex Luger had done a face turn and became the All-American hero after body slamming Yokozuna. So in this situation, I think he would have stayed a Horseman and that would not have happened. They can still have Yoko becoming the WWF champion, which is why I don't have Flair. That's why I wanted to address this. I don't have Flair chasing after the title right now, the top title, because they have a heel Yoko as the champion. That's why I have him in the mix with the tag titles. So with that, instead of Lex Luger getting off the helicopter and winning the Body Slam Challenge against Yoko, I think, again, going back to the guy I said when I was quietly over, I think Crush would be the guy to slam Yokozuna and get that, basically get that push. And honestly, I think looking back, if you go back and look at it, Crush as a babyface was way more over than Luger was as a babyface, and I think Luger was more of a natural heel. So actually, going into that, to give Crush some momentum and to keep him in a high-profile feud building up to his feud with Yokozuna, you can have Luger facing off against Crush. Two powerful guys, who has the better physique. You can have them going at it on Raw. Like I said, while the Steiners are still trying to fend off the Horsemen and retain their tag titles. And of course, you still have Perfect chasing after Shawn Michaels and his Intercontinental title. So this moving forward would bring us into SummerSlam. And going into SummerSlam that year, you can have Shawn Michaels versus Perfect for the Intercontinental title. And I think, again, those two excellent technical wrestlers, two great athletes. Perfect being a two-time Intercontinental champion. The story makes sense due to the attack at WrestleMania. And I think that actually the big thing you can do there is you can actually have still Shawn Michaels retaining the Intercontinental title by countout. I know that's how their real match ended at SummerSlam. This time because Razor Ramon interferes on behalf of Shawn. So helping out his click buddy. And Perfect getting counted out is how Shawn retains the Intercontinental title. For the rest of the Horsemen, again, Luger would not be in the main event against Yokozuna. And this is where I would shift things a little bit too. I actually think that Luger as a heel would actually be better served wrestling someone else actually who he had attacked prior to WrestleMania 9 and knocked him out in an angle. And I think he would have been better suited working against Bret Hart. The King had originally faced Bret Hart after sicking Doink the Clown on him and feigning a broken leg. He had Doink coming out in his place when Bret had that match won. With the sharpshooter, the King attacked him from behind. So instead of using Doink as the King's foil, you can then have the King come out, still pretending to have the broken leg, and he can say he had someone step forward for him, one of the four Horsemen, and Lex Luger can come out and wrestle in the King's place. You can still have the same kind of setup, and when it looks like Bret has the upper hand, you can have it obviously where officials obviously get into the ring because the King interferes, but you can also have the other Horsemen interfere like Razor Ramon, and you can have Flair in there as well, and coming to Bret's aid could be his brother Owen. And that can end in a similar type of like chaos that we had in the original SummerSlam when Bret took on the King and Bret wouldn't let go of the sharpshooter. For So that would obviously be for Luger. For Razor Ramon and Ric Flair, I think they could team up again, and they could be the ones, instead of the Heavenly Bodies, to take on the Steiners for the tag titles. And in that match, I would want the Steiners to retain cleanly, and it could be, again, Razor Ramon taking the pinfall. The reason why, you're going to see in a second, but now you can see a trend where Ramon couldn't stop Crush from challenging Shawn Michaels for the Intercontinental title. He couldn't stop Bret Hart from winning King of the Ring. And now he's taken the pinfall, and they failed to win the tag titles and bring the tag titles back to the Horsemen. Or into the Horsemen in this situation, being in the WWF. The reason why is because the next night you can have the rest of the Horsemen blaming Razor for their downfall and saying that he's coming up short as the enforcer. And you can also play into the fact, because just recently around that time, Sean Waltman had made his debut as the 1-2-3 Kid, and he had upset Razor Ramon with a moonsault, and Razor was also getting criticized a lot for that, with the fans chanting 1, 2, 3. So with that in mind, you can obviously, like I said, have the Horsemen giving him a hard time, telling him that he's coming up short, telling him that he's not representing the group, and that he is the weak link. And while Razor can then not take the verbal abuse and attack the rest of the Horsemen, I think you can have someone debut who had, when he debuted, he acted as Shawn's bodyguard, and take Razor's place in the Horsemen. And that someone would be Kevin Nash. You can have him come out and attack Razor and hit him with 2 jackknife power bombs to establish himself as a dominant character in the company. Still act as that enforcer, so now he's the new enforcer for the Horsemen. The bigger, taller, stronger Nash has now given Ramon the boot, and that can start Razor's face turn that he did have that summer in reality, so you could still have a Razor face turn just a little bit later in the summer. And now we have a new 4 Horsemen of Ric Flair, Enforcer Kevin Nash, Lex Luger, and Shawn Michaels. The way this can branch off is you can still have Shawn Michaels and Razor then generate into their feud, and you can have actually Razor going after Shawn Michaels' Intercontinental title, and you can have Razor still win it, actually, after Shawn Michaels, as a side note, had gotten suspended in reality for a positive drug test. He lost his Intercontinental title. Razor Ramon then was a co-winner of a Battle Royal with Rick Martel. And on the next Raw, Razor defeated Rick the Model Martel to win the new Intercontinental title. So I think we can still go down that road. So Shawn and Razor can still generate and have their feud. And it can still obviously lead up to the ladder match they had at WrestleMania 10. So now with this new 4 Horsemen, you still have Shawn Michaels now feuding with Razor, and then you have Nash, Luger, and Flair. Flair obviously can still join into the feud with Razor, so basically their main foil now, their focus is now being shifted to Razor Ramon as their main focus as we get closer to the 93 Survivor Series. Of course, the main event of that is going to change because of the All-Americans, which were the Steiners with Lex Luger and The Undertaker, taking on the foreign fanatics of Yokozuna, Ludwig Borga, Jacques the Quebecer, and Crush, who had just turned heel. That's going to change because now in the Survivor Series 93, the 4 Horsemen are going to wrestle as a team. And I think that for the foreign fanatics versus the All-Americans, I think you can make more of the focus Yokozuna versus The Undertaker, which was a big feud at that time. So I don't think the match will lose too much with Luger not being a part of it. I'm talking about the All-Americans versus Foreign Fanatics. But for the Horsemen, obviously, to have the culmination of their feud with Razor, Razor can then have his team that he puts together, and he can have, obviously, the 1-2-3 Kid as one of his partners, which he had. Mr. Perfect had then left the company for a while because I know his back injury flared up again, because I'd like him a part of this, but I know he wasn't able to wrestle. So I know Marty Jannetty was on Razor's Survivor Series team. And then the big name could be the Macho Man, Randy Savage. Savage and Flair can reignite their feud going into that Survivor Series with Savage on the team. And because Savage actually never got a return match against Flair after losing the WWF title to him. So, going into this, Shawn Michaels in reality was back by the 93 Survivor Series. His suspension for the positive drug test was up. So he can come out wearing his fake Intercontinental title to keep the feud with Ramon alive. And we can still have a good 4-on-4 match. The eliminations can happen, pretty traditional, where eliminations happen based off basic moves in Survivor Series. It didn't have to be finishers. It could just be, honestly, a top rope splash, or some guys, I swear, were getting pinned with clotheslines off the top rope. But I think the end of the match can come down to Flair versus Savage. And I think just like in WrestleMania 8, Savage can win that with a flash pin and be the sole survivor for his team. The reason I want to go with that direction is because this now reignites the feud between Flair and Savage. And now we're getting close to the end of 1993. And in reality, while Flair, I know he said he really enjoyed his first run with the WWF and considers it one of the best of his career, I know deep down you always know that Flair is a WCW guy, and it was only a matter of time before he made his way back down to Atlanta. And you can then have a career-ending match, but instead of it being Perfect and Flair, you can have Savage and Flair go at it one more time. Probably the very next night on Raw after that probably the Monday Night Raw after that Survivor Series. And like I said, after that 8-man is concluded, where you can still have other feuds carry on, like Razor and Shawn Michaels, along with maybe even the 1-2-3 Kid starting to feud with Diesel to assist Razor Ramon to even up those odds. You can have Flair versus Savage and have a rare Macho Man match on Raw. And this time, Randy Savage is able to defeat Ric Flair in a career-ending match and send Ric Flair back to WCW, thereby ending his run at the end of '93 with the WWF. So that would conclude the run of the Four Horsemen. You can still have Luger. You can still have him stay healed. No one needs to turn face due to this, but you can have them quietly disband now that the leader is gone. You can still have them go forward with their feuds. I think Luger would have had a more successful run in the WWF had he stayed a heel. And obviously, Shawn Michaels and Diesel had their success winning the tag titles, etc. And I don't think much would change for them. And obviously, Razor had his most success in the WWF as a babyface. So that's where I'm going to end it here. So their run would be a little bit less than a year. And like I said, while it's not a very long run, I think it would give them some good feuds. And I do like the 4 guys that I chose to represent that stable. And I think actually it would, like I said, it would, especially with them feuding with the Steiner brothers, I think it would definitely pique a lot of the interest of some old school NWA fans. And it might create some new WWF interest at the time when the product was very, very cold, because of the steroid scandal and everything like that. So let me know what you think about that stable, that Four Horsemen stable in the WWF. Tell me if you would switch anybody out. If you like Kevin Nash coming in midway to join and kick out Razor Ramon. And also, like I said, leave your comments down below and let me know any other future topics you want me to talk about. I will be back with another match analysis episode as well very soon. And again, also, as a side note, I am recording this on Thanksgiving, so to everyone who supported me and anyone who sees this, happy Thanksgiving to everybody. And again, like I said, always remember to like and subscribe and keep the comments coming, and I definitely want to hear what you want me to talk about. So as always, thank you very much, and have a great Thanksgiving, everyone.